Well, Amanda, let's start with our opening question. What does high performance mean to you?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, that's a brilliant question and the purpose of the podcast. And it's something I give an awful lot of thought to in my job. And I think sometimes you can overplay these things. But for me, high performance is about execution. Because, I sometimes think that you can have all these glamorous strategies and these wonderful things, and they all sound very clever and sort of convoluted. But actually, at the end of the day, you can have a pretty average strategy. But if you execute it really well, that can deliver really high performance. And so, I've always been an execution queen. My team will always say it's always about execution, execution, execution. So I'm going to stick with that, Jake. I think that feels good to me.
An execution queen. It sounds far more sinister than it actually is.
Well, or maybe not.
Well, let's talk about that then, because I think this is really helpful for the people listening to this, whether they're CEOs like you, whether they're entrepreneurs just starting out, whether they're teachers working with children, whether they're parents trying to get their children to do a certain thing. What is the secret to carrying out execution in a really effective way?
So I think it has to start with real clarity of message. So like for me, 2 years ago when I came here, within 4 weeks of being here, I stood on the stage. Well, actually, it was a virtual stage because we were in the middle of COVID, and laid out what we thought the plan for Aviva was going to be. And it was really simple. It was just 3 things, but it was 3 things that investors could get behind, 3 things that, our colleagues could get behind, the board could get behind. And so that clarity is really important. I think that, for me anyway, every single person in this organization needs to be able to understand what the strategy actually is, and what good looks like. So you start there, and then it's about breaking it down into the sort of component parts of what needs to be done. And again, a real old-fashioned statement, I know, but what gets measured gets done. So, if it's diversity targets, if it's top-line targets, if it's profit targets, if it's, CO2 emissions, we measure that and we make sure that we're on track to really deliver. And, it's not simple, obviously, but it is just about real focus on those things.
So tell us then how, like your own origin story, Amanda, as a girl from the Rhondda Valley, is able to stand up in front of a room full of, of thousands of people and deliver with such clarity that kind of message.
Yeah, I mean, so yes, Rhondda Valley, right? Both my grandparents were miners. And my grandfather went down the mine at the age of 14, and he retired at the age of 60. He died at the age of 99 and a half, which I think is incredible. So I think there's a little bit of that Rhondda Valley resilience in there, which if you're going to stand up in front of thousands of people and deliver something, you have to have that. But the key thing for me, I think, honestly, was just totally in the upbringing, like my mum and dad, and the way that everything was just the way we were brought up. So I went to Sunday school, and it wasn't so much about the religion, it was just about what everybody did, and everybody went to Sunday school. And at Sunday school, it was about performance. We would have concerts. I would play the piano, I would sing, I would do a recitation. And if I didn't do that, I'd be like really fed up. It'd be like, I want to be doing that, and I don't want to do it with others. I want to do it on my own. It was one of those things. Me and my sister used to compete over like who was going to have the biggest part in whatever play we were doing. And honestly, I think that I look back now at the age of, I don't know, I would have been 3, 4, 5, 6, starting to do that until I was probably 13 or 14, until obviously it becomes very uncool to do those sort of things. And that has stood me in such good stead. I'm not saying that when I stand up on that stage, we have our results next week on the 10th of August. I will be, nervous. I will be thinking about what questions we could get asked, but I will always draw from that experience of always having done it. And I think that makes such a big difference.
So tell us what was happening in that environment then when they see that young girl standing up on stage and doing the piano recital or singing in front of the group. What kind of messages were you hearing from your parents and your grandparents and the wider community?
Yeah, I mean, it was all about family. I mean, in Wales, and even if it wasn't your direct family, the community was the family. And both my grandparents were very actively involved in my upbringing. You know, my mum worked in the local shop and in the local factory. My dad was more of a salesperson. He was traveling all over the place, but it was all very close. You know, every Sunday we would go to, you know, we would basically have 3 teas on a Sunday. You know, we would basically have one in our own house, then one at one grandparents and one of the other grandparents, because everybody had to be seen and you had to be with each other. So that environment was really strong, but also it was really tough. If you think about the time that I was growing up, the miners' strikes, and you know, effectively that whole Welsh community was falling apart because everybody was employed either in the mine or in delivery of a service that delivered to the mine. And so when the strikes happened in the sort of early 80s, you know, my abiding memory is just of how difficult that really was. And you know, collecting money for the miners and, you know, putting cans of meat and corned beef and soup on the door so that people could collect. And it was really, really tough. But that sort of community, but there was always a smile, there was always a song, there was always a performance, and you just felt safe. You know, you just felt like it was a fantastic environment to grow up in. And I wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't change it for the world. You know, like the comprehensive school I went to was like really an average school. There was no real aspiration. But you know, there was lots of music, there was lots of happiness, there was lots of fun, there was lots of friends. And I just look back at that and I just think it was just an amazing upbringing. And, you know, very different, I think, to, you know, what my children have been brought up to, for sure.
So what characteristics then, as a leader now, as the head of the family, if you like, at Aviva, would you seek to take from those experiences and replicate in the corporate world?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that you've learned, which is, you know, you do need to transform yourself. Otherwise, you know, you will be transformed. If you think about that environment, it was sort of fairly obvious that coal was coming to the end of its days, you know, the economics of it and everything else. And, you know, I find it ironic today that I am a campaigner for net zero. And, you know, we as Aviva do not invest in fossil fuels. And yet my whole being is being brought up. I'm here because of coal, right? I'm here because that's what my grandparents did. But it didn't, the community didn't transform itself, you know. The politicians didn't push for that, and it didn't transform itself. And so I think that as a consequence of that, if you were to go to the Rhondda Valley today, you know, there really isn't any industry, there really isn't much going on. And I think that's a real shame, because there are brilliant people there and there's really real talent. So I think that's the thing that I learned that you should do that didn't happen. And then there's the resilience. You know, I think you do have to be super resilient in that environment. And as a CEO, I mean, it is all about resilience, because you are constantly reviewed. I mean, you know, if somebody writes something about Aviva, whether it's the Mail Online or the Financial Times, if you dare to look at the comments below the line, which, by the way, I'd strongly never recommend doing, I'm sure you don't yourself, you know, it's always really horrible or really critical. And you sort of never, if you took that too much to heart, you sort of wouldn't get up, you know, you'd sort of think, well, why bother? I don't want to be critical. So you've got to be able to take feedback and be resilient, I think.
And how have you learned the lesson about not looking at those comments? A lot of people learn that lesson through looking at them and being affected.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I used to look at them all the time, because you'd want to know how something had landed. And, you know, you read the piece, and often, of course, the journalist understands, you know, what's going on, and you can give them context, but the sort of readers don't always understand that. But then when you look below the line and you see, you know, there was often a comment about, you know, what I was wearing, or my hair, or my makeup, or, you know, my background, or something like, and then you sort of think, actually, that's really not adding anything to my understanding of whether or not, you know, that had gone well or not. And then when you speak to the journalists themselves and they say to you, oh, we never look below the line, you know, and you sort of think, well, okay, if they don't look below the line and they're writing the pieces, then, you know, I guess I'm not going to do that either.
The thing is, though, I think your story is a really good example about how we get things wrong so often. So someone could look at this with no understanding and go, Amanda Blanc, what on earth does she know about running Aviva, because she grew up in the valleys in South Wales, and she's female, and there's hardly any female CEOs in FTSE 100 businesses. But actually, the conversation we've had for the last 10 minutes is that the very reason you're sitting having this conversation with us is because of the upbringing in the values, not in spite of it. And I sort of think back to, you just said there's really been no recovery there since Margaret Thatcher basically declared war really on the mines and on mining. You can reflect on that and say, actually, from a environmental perspective, maybe it was the right thing to stop mining in the way that we were. However, it's about the way you deliver the message. It's about the way you treat those people. It's about the way you look after people. And quite honestly, it was brutal. So I wonder whether your style of management was also inspired by the fact that you saw your people, your wonderful people that you've just spoken about, being treated quite brutally.
I mean, I think, Jake, that's absolutely right. And not just there, but all of your experiences through your career. You always look at who does something well and who does something not so well. And I often think that you learn a lot more from people who don't do things well than you do from the people that do it brilliantly. And, if you look at, there will always be tough decisions as a CEO. There will be people that just don't fit anymore. There would be parts of the business, we have had to sell 7 businesses over the last 2 years that Aviva owned in France and Italy and Poland, because we needed to refocus the business on the markets that we felt we could be successful. Those weren't bad people. And so when you deliver the message that, we need to make this decision, you need to deliver it with care and with thoughtfulness. And, you talk about there will be better owners for you than Aviva. There's better ways of doing it. And I think that's right. I mean, you don't have to do things in a horrible way. You really don't. You can be really tough. And, my team will tell you that I can be really tough to work for. I'm relentless and demanding. But at the same time, you can do it with a smile on your face and you can do it in a nice way. And I think that, that whole experience at that time, and, that was brutal. It was brutal. And as you say, for environmental and economic reasons, it was probably the right thing. But, just the way things can be done, it leaves even today, it's still talked about. So, it's harsh, really harsh.
But so it's often said though, Amanda, that for you to almost be that visionary, to look 20, 30 years into the future and see how a company or a community needs to evolve, that there's 3 stages. That the first stage is people will ridicule the new idea, then they'll oppose it before they'll eventually come to accept it as self-evident. So how do you do that and almost retain that sense of dignity, that kindness, that humanity when you're proposing ideas that people just can't see and find it difficult to comprehend?
I think the best example of this is if you think about the net zero debate and, climate change. So first of all, you start from a position of everybody denies that it's a thing. This is ridiculous. This is not a thing. We had a hot summer in 1977. These things are going to happen. And I think the way to get around all of that is through facts and through actually talking people through your rationale and why you think it's important. So, as Aviva, as a company that has been alive for 325 years, I can't just think about the next quarter. I mean, the FTSE is about the next quarter, right? So we'll have results next week, and then we'll have results in November, and then we'll have another set of results in March next year. But I, as the CEO, have to think much further ahead than that. In what we invest in the businesses that we invest in, leveling up across the UK, for example. We are one of the biggest investors in UK infrastructure. If we simply thought about, the next quarter, we wouldn't get there. And people do ridicule. Well, these climate change companies, all these new ideas, I can remember when the wind turbines went up first in the Rhondda Valley, actually, and they went up in the forest, which was like above, my dad could see it from his house. And oh my gosh, he was like, those bloody things, they ruined my view, this is absolutely terrible. And that was, 15, maybe more years ago. But now, today, you see that they are actually supplying a significant amount of energy into that community and wider. And therefore, they're making a massive difference in this energy crisis that we're in today. So I think, you have to go through those various stages to get people into it. But facts usually make a big difference.
So let's talk about the transition then from growing up in Wales to ending up where you are now. I know that when you left university, you had 2 job offers and you took the harder option. Can you explain to us why the job that you took was the harder option?
Yeah. So, I mean, I left university. I did a degree in history, which my children laugh at me about now. You know, they're like, what do you know about history? But it was a means to an end. You know, you sort of finished and then it was like, okay, what am I going to do? And yeah, I got 2 job offers, one with Mid Glamorgan County Council and one with actually Commercial Union, which was, you know, one of the founding companies of Aviva. So I've sort of ended up here where I started. And it would have been so easy, wouldn't it, to stay at home, you know, live with my mum and dad, get my washing done, stay in the community where you're very safe with all your friends from school, and and I'm sure it would have been fine, and I'm sure I would have been very happy. But I decided not to. I decided to take the job with Commercial Union in Luton branch, and I remember turning up on that very first day. Living in a bed and breakfast. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. It was like, what on earth is going on? And you turn up and you learn about insurance, and then you think, actually, this is really a fantastic industry to be in. And I'm going to, I'm quite enjoying this. But it was, it wasn't the easiest decision to take. It would have been much easier to stay at home.
So why did you take it then?
Because I've always, I think if I reflect back on my career, I do like the hard option. Coming here 2 years ago was not the easy option. I had built a career as a portfolio. I had some private equity stuff that I was doing. I had various other things that I was involved in. I had about 8 or 9 different businesses that I was working with. And then I got offered this role. And, it was at the point in time that Aviva was just seen as being in a real, it was really a problem.
So take us into your head then, Amanda, and tell us, I mean, because you've said that in quite an easy way, that I always take the harder option. But take us into your head when you're making those decisions and help us understand why that's the case. So
I think, when I'm going through this, it's basically, what could be the likely outcomes here? So you start to think about, you've got a reputation which I've built up over sort of 30 years of being in business, and actually it was quite successful. So, all very happy. And I built this portfolio, as I said, which was all good. But then you get the opportunity to actually fix something which you inherently believe is fantastic, but has been badly managed or badly led, or bad decisions have been taken. And you think, actually, do you know what? I could do a better job than that. And then you have to have a bit of confidence. So my head is thinking, could I do a better job than that? Yeah, I think I probably could. I think I'm probably a good leader. I think I'm probably a good communicator. I think I probably know what needs to be done. And by the way, I do get shit done. So I thought, actually, I think I could do it. I think I really could. And then you have to back yourself. And of course, you've got people around you who will back you. My husband, my family, and, they're always so supportive. And I think with that support and your own confidence, and you have to have a bit of arrogance, you have to think, I can do it, even though countless others have failed, because there is a little bit of, well, countless others have failed. I can remember taking a job in 2011, which was to run a company in the UK, which basically had been up for sale. And I met the owners of the company, and they were trying to sell it, but they couldn't sell it. And they basically said, well, look, you may as well give it a go, because what have we got to lose? And everybody went. And I remember reading the insurance press at the time, basically saying, she won't make that work. She won't make it work. And I was like, okay, well, we'll see, won't we? And then, of course, you get even more determined, don't you? It's like, they're not going to bloody tell me that I won't make it work. I will make that work. It's not that hard. And then you just get on with it and you put yourself out there. But you've got to have a bit of confidence, I think.
But there's a really interesting distinction there between in a number of those examples that you've just offered us, Amanda, around some people would, given that 30 years of success and the portfolio and the reputation for delivery that you've got, would look to not lose that reputation. So they'd almost play it safe, whereas you're still looking to play to win, to take risks, to put that great name on the line. So how do you mitigate against the two of playing not to lose and instead focusing on playing to win?
Well, I think you mitigate by ensuring that when you sign up to do something like this, it isn't just you. I'm one person and there are like 23,000 other people that work for Aviva. But it's, you're never on your own. So it's okay. One of the key mitigants for me is having the best team around you. So, the first thing, and I've changed the vast majority of my executive team, like 12 out of 14
Right.
in 2 years. And I think you do have to have the best people that you believe give you the best chance to win. And then what you hope is that they then bring in, the best people, that they give them the chance to win. And some of those people have come from inside the organization, and some of them have come from outside the organization. But I think having that ability to identify who is going to be on this journey with me through the tough times and through the good times, that's a leadership thing, which I think over 30 years you do develop that sort of sense of who's good and who's not.
So give us a masterclass on how you develop that then. What do you go for as a team member?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what you're looking for in the team. So at any one point in time, of course, the team is in a different state of flux. But at the very, very beginning, you're looking to fill your core roles. I mean, the things that are going to make the biggest difference to the outcome. And then no compromise. You have to have the best people into those roles. So for me, that was the CEO roles of running the divisions of the business and making sure that those people were absolutely brilliant. And, and getting on with doing that, making the tough decisions very, very quickly and early on that you have to do that. And then you look at, by the way, I should have said, attitude over anything else. It's about behavior. Even
attitude over ability?
But I think, to be honest, yes. Capability, I would say, yes, because I think, there's a very old-fashioned hire for attitude, train for skill. But, you have to have the right attitude, because I do not want to work with people who are, poorly behaved or just can't do it. Obviously, you have to have some capability. If you're the finance director, then you probably have to know quite a bit about numbers. If you're the risk director, you have to know a little bit about risk. So there are some things, but really, it is about, have you got the right core values and behaviors to be able to do a good job? And then you build out from there. And, as the team evolves, and I would say, it is only now, 2 years in, that that I've got the team in the place where I really want it to be. And, I can remember within the first 3 months, an external saying to me, well, you're a bit slow. You haven't changed much of your team yet. And I was like, yeah, give me a chance, right? These things you have to be thoughtful about it. But also, the bigger the organization, the more difficult it is to get that right. In a smaller organization, you can do it pretty quickly. But in a bigger organization, you have to be more thoughtful about what's required.
You mentioned values and behaviors. What are the values and behaviors that you're looking for?
Yeah. So, I think definitely, I hate anything where it's all about a me. So it is about team. So I call it One Aviva here. So, it's about, you may be in the life company or you may be in the general insurance company, but when you join my team as Exco, you have to think about the group. You have to think about what's best for the group. So that, and not many people have that, because some people can be really successful and they can be really good at winning, but to the detriment of everybody else. And, that's not good when you're running a group. I think also there is the sort of feeling around community, that it isn't just about the profit, it's more around the balance of colleagues, around the role we play in the community, and the role we play externally. So you can't just want to win for Aviva, you've also got to win for insurance, you've got to win for Norwich, you've got to win for York, you've got to win for all the places where we've got big presence. So there's also that. And then I think there's some emotional intelligence, having that ability to sit in the team and understand what the hell is going on, because there's often a lot of politics going on around any room. I think that's also really important to me.
And I just want to pick up on one other thing, because lots of people struggle with making changes. They particularly struggle with removing people from a team that they don't think are right for that team. And, you've changed 12 of your 14 senior team members. That's, I don't know, rough maths, 90% change, right? How have you delivered that to not just make the change that Aviva needs, but to make the change that also sort of protects them? How do you go about having those conversations with people?
Yeah, it's often, it is the most difficult thing. There's no doubt about that. It does get easier. I probably shouldn't say that. It does get easier the more you've done it, because, you think about, what the best way of delivering the news is. But quite often when you're having the conversation with people, they already know. They already know because they can see the way the business is moving. They can see the way the strategy is developing, and they can often see that they're not going to be happy in that strategy, because you've got to remember it is a two-way process. I'm making a decision that I think I want this sort of person for the team, but they're also making the decision that they don't want to be, they don't agree with the strategy, or they don't feel they want to be part of that journey. So quite often, by the time you sit down and have the conversation, you're in a good place. It's very rarely that you're delivering a news to somebody when they've no clue that news is coming. I have to say, that's not often the case. And then it's about elegance, and it's about how do you do that in a way that, keeps everybody looking, it keeps it elegant, that they, it's good for them and it's good for the organization.
So can I ask you, Amanda, about a question that we often get asked from listeners on this, about the managing of sort of your maverick or your superstar talents? Because when you were describing this attitude over behavior, I think most people can understand that's preferable. But how would you deal with somebody that's delivering great results for you, but isn't doing it in the right way, demonstrating those values and behaviors that you demand?
Yeah. So first of all, I think, when you say delivering, if they're not delivering and the values, then they're not delivering. Because so the way that I measure the scorecard of the performance here is we do look at the financials. We also look at the customer outcomes, but we also look, is somebody delivering against the values? And every one of those is assessed, right? So, it could be a delivering, it's usually a top line or profitability. So first of all, you have the conversation, which is, look, I love what you're doing. The results are absolutely brilliant, but, you can't do that. You can't do it that way. And sometimes just even that conversation of, oh, right, I hadn't realized that it was having that impact on other people. Because quite often, honestly, people they just bury their head in the sand and they just say, oh, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to pretend that that's not happening. You can do that for so long. But ultimately, then your own credibility is shot to pieces, because I can be on here going, it's all about values. And if my team can say, well, I listened to that podcast, Amanda, but you've got 2 people in your team that you let that behavior happen, that's just not acceptable. So I think you have the conversation. Then ultimately, honestly, if the behaviors are not right, you have to deal with it. You do have to deal with it. It's tough.
So it sounds, the way that you're describing it, that you could almost say that a big part of your role as a leader is to be a coach. So what are the best coaching questions that you could advise our listeners they could ask that gets people both delivering results and doing it in the right way?
Yeah. Gosh, I've never thought about it like that, because I would say almost every conversation I have is a coaching conversation, really, internally. Because you're always thinking about how can you improve the performance. So I usually always start with, okay, what's going well? What's going well, because everybody needs a conversation. I'm literally in the middle of doing my half-year reviews at the moment. And so I've done about 8 out of the 14. And, I always start with that. Okay, let's go back over the last 6 months. What's going well? And then you move into the, okay, what would you do differently if you look back over the last 6 months? And quite often people will, they will focus on the things that they want to focus on, but you've done your notes, what you want to get to, and eventually you can get the conversation into the place where you want to get to. And then you agree an action plan of what you're going to do differently going forward. And that, for me, that's the sort of, it seems really simple. Even listening to it, I think probably that's a bit simplistic, but, just allowing people the time to just talk, and those performance conversations are really, really key to me. And then I'll write that up, and I'll send it to them and say, this is what we talked about. And so we can think about it then the next time we meet. And I meet with my exco once a week, in terms of as an exco we meet. So those, even the team coaching conversations all the way around, not just, me coaching, them coaching me and everybody. And then the performance, we have a monthly one-to-one.
Right. And so who coaches you then?
So I have had lots of coaches. If I think back through my career, you've had the informal coach and the formal coach, haven't you? And, my very first sort of boss that had a big impact on me, I can remember walking into his room in Leeds, and he was lying on the floor. And I said to him, he was called Alan Dewey, and he'll know if he listens to this. And I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm blue sky thinking. Okay. But he was a totally brilliant coach, because he constantly pushed me and pushed for performance, encouraged me to do my MBA. And, he was brilliant. And then there have been subsequent other people that I've worked with or known that I've turned to for coaching advice, and they make a big impact on you. But, I would also say, everybody that I work with, I always treat every conversation as, what am I going to learn from this conversation? And I think you have to go into every conversation like that. If you go in with an arrogance of this organization's perfect and I'm doing everything right, you're not going to be successful.
So tell us your best learning then.
Oh my God, my best learning. Well, oh gosh, I mean, there's been like so many, hasn't there?
Give us more than one, then we'll take as many as you want.
Okay, right.
There's real. The point is, Amanda, there's real value for people in hearing you talk in this way, and then it gets passed to you, and then it gets passed on to hundreds of thousands of people on here, which I think is just of benefit.
Yeah, so I think one of my very early learnings around communication, I mean, and again, it may sound really simple, is that you sort of assume that when you do a communication that it gets cascaded in the same way that you've given that communication through the organization. And I soon learned that actually that does not happen. So by the time that it gets to, the actual people who front up to customers, if you're not careful, it's nothing like the communication that it started with. So one of the things I've always done, for the last sort of 10, 12 years is ensure that I do either like a roadshow or a very big town halls on a regular basis, so I can actually deliver my own communication to the business, so that the business can hear from me what I'm worried about, what I'm really pleased about, what I really need from them. So I think, I think that's one of my sort of key learnings, which I would never not do. And even during COVID, when I couldn't get out to the business, I would do virtual town halls, and I would call into customer service teams and listen to them. The other thing I think is you have to listen, be your own customer. And we've not cracked this at Aviva yet. But one of my key learnings is, you think, because the data you're getting is a certain way. And then you sort of, because I've got quite a high profile now on LinkedIn and Twitter and various other things, people will complain directly to me. And I get these complaints and I'm like, really? That's sort of doesn't really stack with what I'm hearing. So being your own customer, and I say this to the Exco all the time, and they get sort of sick of me saying it, allows you to experience what it's like to be a customer, and good or bad. So, you need to know what it's like for your customers dealing with your organization. And you can do that by being your own customer, by also listening to the people on the front line. Never distance yourself so much. You're in your bloody ivory tower, so far away from everything else that's going on, that you do not know what's actually happening in your own organization. I mean, look, just a bit about reviews. I've had many bosses I've never had a review with. They've never told me how I'm doing. And just that regular review, sitting down with the team, talking about how we are doing as a team or how we are doing individually, that's really, really, really important. Those would be the sort of things that come. There are probably millions more, and as I go through, if I think of some more, Jake, I'll sort of bring them in. You put me on the spot there.
I'm also interested to know about what you learn in the difficult times. If we look at the trajectory of your career, it was an upward trajectory, really impressive, making moves. There was a period where you went to Zurich, wasn't there, which didn't work out. And I'm interested really in, without going into specifics, obviously, why it was hard for you, but also the importance for people to hear you talk about the importance of leaving behind things that are not good for you or aren't working out for you, which can sometimes be the harder decision, because it's scary to walk away.
So there's been a couple of occasions. So my career has not always been an upward trajectory, and it's not always been plain sailing. And I say this, to the graduates here and to the apprentices here, that I have made mistakes, and I've made big mistakes. So I think it was about 1998, I had some experience with consultants. I was a branch manager of Commercial Union in Leeds. I had this fantastic job. I was the youngest ever and first female branch manager, but I thought I was going to be a consultant. So I decided to resign from this job that I had, which was leading people, which is a wonderful job, and join a consultancy firm. Literally, I landed there, and within 6 months, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I found myself, I was delivering pitches to clients when actually I wanted to lead the business I was pitching to, not deliver the pitch to it and sell to it. So that was my first mistake. So I left there really quickly. I knew it was wrong for me, and I walked away, and and I got another job, and I became a regional director at AXA. So I learned quickly, and moving on quickly from your mistakes is, I think, really important if you know you've got it wrong. And Zurich was a good example of that. I thought that going to Zurich was going to be a really important step on my upward career. And I think it was a fantastic lesson for me that culture is everything. And if you can't fit into that culture, then, if that organization isn't going to change, then you need to make the change yourself. And honestly, I left and I did not know what I was going to do. I didn't. I had no idea. I mean, I had this really high profile role, but I knew I couldn't stay. And I knew that it just culturally, it didn't work for me. So I thought, actually, I'm going to just leave and see what happens. And, you sort of have this moment where you've done that. And, I was on the plane coming back from, I think it was actually from Germany. I landed in London, and you sort of, you realize, well, what am I going to do now? I'm a person that gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning and goes to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And I work. That's what I do. I work. So what am I going to do? Because it's immediate. You're out of it. And then your phone starts going, and then your LinkedIn starts going. And then, the people that start sort of coalescing around you, and you find all these wonderful new opportunities. But being brave to make the right decision when it's not right. I say it all the time to people. I think they think I'm joking, but I've made those decisions, I've made those mistakes, and it's important to make mistakes and learn from them.
So tell us about bravery then. You just referenced it there. I think of all the things that I've read about your career and your background, Amanda, is the bravery that you have to speak truth to power, to call out behaviors that are unacceptable, even when maybe you're compromised, or maybe it's going to cost you. Tell us a little bit around how you develop that.
Yeah, well, I've always liked to speak out. I've never been shy about speaking out if I believe that if it's for the right thing. I think that starts with my background, honestly. I do. But also, you sort of see people bitching and moaning about things, and you're like, well, tell them, tell them what you want differently. Speak up. So I've done that. It doesn't always work. Honestly, some people do not want to hear the truth. They definitely do not. But I do genuinely believe that, if you want to look yourself in the mirror, if you want to have and say you've got integrity, then you've got to hold yourself to account. And sometimes it's painful, and sometimes it doesn't really work, but you've got to do it. And, I'm sure you might be referring to the AGM, which happened this year, where, these men that think they can say this stuff, it's not acceptable. But, in the heat of the moment, you don't always see it.
So what was it that they did actually say? Because I think it's helpful for people to understand how it can often be subtle and maybe insidious, what people say, rather than directly abusive.
Yeah, so there was, I think there were sort of 3 comments, and it's all on record, so because it's recorded, so there's no sort of getting away from it. They were very pleased that there were a number of women on the board, because women are very good at housekeeping, and that was a good thing. So that was the first comment. That sort of set the tone. And then another comment was, that I should wear trousers, and that I was they referred to the previous CEO, that I was whatever this previous CEO was. And then the third one was that I wasn't the man for the job. And so, these were comments which, honestly, you're in the middle of an AGM, and an AGM's a very strange experiences if you've ever experienced one. You literally are on a stage, and you are thinking about every question that can come at you. Yep. You do not expect that question, those comments to come at you. And then it's only when I got on a plane to Canada and landed in Canada and thought, do you know what, actually, and my phone was sort of pinging, because the FT were in the room. The FT were actually in the room, and they had picked up on those comments. And it was like, that's just not on. It's actually not on. You know, I'm the government's Women in Finance champion. And I think I've had a pretty successful career, and actually I think I've done a pretty good job at Aviva. And that was not acceptable.
See, because what I was interested though, I remember an incident from many years ago in my own career when somebody made a racist comment in my company. And I remember my reaction was to be shocked, first of all, and then almost wonder, am I being set up for some kind of joke, or, you know, was it intended with humor? And like, I was trying to process lots of different confusing thoughts before I reached that conclusion of, actually, that's not acceptable and needs to be challenged. And that's what I'm wondering, on that stage when you were listening to that, what were the kind of thought processes that were going on for you?
Well, I think the first process is, you know, how dare they? You know, what are these people that they're sort of making this comment? That's the first point. And then you leave the stage, because, you know, we're only up there for like 45, 50 minutes. And then you walk into a room, and obviously there's loads of my team were there preparing questions, and they walked in and they went, that was out of order. You know, it was, their immediate reaction was, that was completely out of order.
Right.
And you're like, yes, it was out of order. And then you know, you think, okay, well, what can I do about it? Because you're off the stage at that point, aren't you?
Yeah.
And then obviously the FT picked it up, and you sort of think, actually, I can turn this into something good. So by making the sort of LinkedIn post and writing about it in the way that I did, I think that was right. But Damien, just to go back to your point, there have been many times in my career where I've been in that position where you sort of sit and you think, they didn't mean it. They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't mean it. Did they mean it? Okay, and of course, by the time you've really thought it through, you're sort of like you've moved on and something else has happened. But we now think a lot here, and I'm sure all organizations do, about that, about tackling it in the moment, and basically saying, actually, I don't know what you meant by that, but I actually felt quite offended by that. And, you know, I don't know what, you know, I don't think that was acceptable. And we've done quite a lot of work with our teams around that to make sure that we get the right behavior. And we will not get it right. Definitely not 100% of the time. But I think we're getting better at calling it out when you see it.
Are you encouraged by the reaction of the younger generation? I mean, I've got a very young daughter. I said, oh, the man that used to live here, I'm going to talk to the lady that now runs it. And she said, oh, it's a lady. And I said, yeah. She goes, oh, what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about in a meeting where people criticized her for being a woman. And Florence was totally aghast at this. And I know that you've spoken about your daughter's reaction. Are you encouraged by the reaction of the younger generation where, you know, maybe, you know, you had in some ways become almost immune to some of the sexism because it had been commonplace, whereas it just simply will not be accepted by the next generation? It's kind of our role, I guess, to ensure that is the case.
Well, 100%, Jake. I mean, for the likes of Florence and for my daughters, Rhiannon and Caitlin, you know, this has to be fixed because it's been going on for too long and it's been just seen as being acceptable for too long. So I think that you know, I went home that evening and we sort of, you know, we talked about what I'd done that day, and I was, you know, and they were just like, what? But and their reaction was, well, what did you do? Did you kick them out? Yeah, that was their reaction.
That's the Rhondda. That's the Rhondda.
I mean, that's the Rhondda for you. Yeah, it's like, we'll get them. But you know, it was just like that's really, you know, they couldn't believe it because they just will not accept that, and thank goodness they will not accept that. But I would say it's universal, whether it's male or female. You know, the response to it has been, you know, completely that it's unacceptable, from other chairs in the FTSE 100 to CEOs from Australia and, you know, and America that have all sort of reached out to say, you know, maybe this is a bit of a turning point, that this is just simply not acceptable anymore.
But there are still only 9 female chief execs in the UK's top 100 companies.
Yeah.
There are no women of colour at all.
No.
So this still is very much a work in progress. What would you say to those? I suppose the first thing I was going to say, what would you say to young female business leaders? But what would you say to male business leaders about how they and we can also help fix this problem?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the number might be 8, Jake. Because I think the number for FTSE CEOs. I mean, it's just totally unacceptable, isn't it, that we sort of sit here today, and I like to turn it on its head. So if there were 92 women and 8 men, what would the conversation be? and it would be more action oriented. And I think the problem is there's a lot of talking about it. Everybody recognizes that something needs to be done. Everybody does the easy things. You do the unconscious bias training, you do you have sponsorship programs, mentoring programs, female leadership programs, all of that, but the numbers do not change. And in fact, this year in women in financial services firms, the percentage of senior women has not moved at all. It was moving at 1% a year. This year it hasn't moved at all. So, the conversation has to be whether you're a male leader, a female leader, what are we going to do to fix what the core issues are? And the core issues are within the pipeline, within the organization. The fact is that too many women leave the organizations. That's critical caring points, whether it's caring for parents or caring for children. And when they come back, they don't come back at the same level, or they don't come back in a job share that they can keep, that same level. They come back for more junior roles, and they then do not progress from there. And, so making sure that you look at your talent much earlier on, and you identify who the talented people are, and that you've earmarked them from a very early stage, and making sure you manage that through is absolutely critical. I mean, there's that I've done some work with Bain on this. We've written a Women in Finance blueprint, which basically goes through retention, recruitment, culture, all the things that brilliant organizations do to make sure that things improve. But genuinely, if at the rate that we're improving now, we'll never get there for Florence. We won't get there for Florence at this point. So it will still be the same.
So let me flip the question then and ask you to answer it from a different perspective, Amanda. What advice would you give to a 9-year-old Amanda in the Rhondda Valley that would make her believe that she could reach the status that you have?
So I do the speakers for schools, and I go back to schools in places like the Rhondda and in Newport and Bridgend, and to speak to the kids, because I think honestly they need to see more role models. I don't think it would matter what I would say to a 9-year-old, because a 9-year-old is hopefully a happy-go-lucky, not thinking about anything. But once you get to the sort of your comprehensive school, your secondary school level, there are no role models. There are no people that they can look at and say, oh, that person's like me. So when I go in and I say, I went to a school like this, and I show a picture of Treorchy Comprehensive School, and I had these results, which actually weren't that good. And I've worked my way through my career, and my grandparents were miners. They've all got their mouths open, and they're like, oh, right. Because business is also seen as being like a negative thing. So you can be a doctor, or you can be a lawyer, or you can be an accountant, but who celebrates being a CEO or being a successful entrepreneur? I think there are just too few role models, and I think that's what schools need. They need to see people like that. And we are in Norwich, we're about to do some work with local businesses, and looking at how can we put our own people and local doing T-levels together, to just get a sense of what it's like to work for an insurance company, that it's not boring, it's actually bloody exciting, and there's lots of really good things that happen. But people don't look at an insurance company, they think of just meerkats on television. They don't think of all the brilliant things that we do. And, we've got to get better at that.
Brilliant. I love the passion. And you sit and talk to us, Amanda, and you seem so confident, and you seem so centered, and I'm sure that in the role you're in, it's not always the case. Could we talk briefly about imposter syndrome? Because I think there may well be some young ladies listening to this going, well, I wish I didn't have my imposter syndrome, or I wish I had Amanda's confidence. What's your relationship like with imposter syndrome?
Look, I mean, hundreds of times I sit here, and I was in Wales at the weekend with my mum and dad, and we were driving through the valley, and I dropped my kids off there for a couple of days. And then you come back here, and I'm doing this podcast with you. And it's like, really? And honestly, my first question was when they asked me to do this, why are they asking me to do this? Well, why do you want to hear from me? And I feel like that all the time. You know, I'll go and I'm on the Prime Minister's Business Council, and you go to that and you're thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I here? But you've got it. That's only a sort of like 10 seconds, and then you snap into it and you think, I'm here for a reason, because I've got something to add, because I am from a different background, because I have been successful, because I know what good looks like, and I know I can help, and I'm prepared to speak up. But look, I think everybody has that. I think men and women. It's not just something that women suffer with, but girls and women particularly. If the number of young talented women that I speak to at Aviva, and they are just, all they need is to be told that they're good enough to do the next thing. Or that's all it takes, is somebody to say, why don't you apply for that job? You've got all the right skills to be able to do, all the capability to be able to do it. Why wouldn't you put yourself forward? And then a little push, and then you get people going. That's all it takes.
Which in part answers my question then, Amanda, of that I'm interested in how your parents have responded to your success and that community that you came from. So how do they react now when they see you sort of strolling up to 10 Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister, or coming on podcasts like this? And equally, what did they say that you felt was important to put you in that position?
I can't possibly repeat what my father would say about going to number 10. So not on here anyway. I think my mum and dad, we don't talk about it, honestly. They'll say you work too hard. But they've always been, it's about the person that you are. It's about, being there for your family, being there for the, the people that you work with. We really don't talk about it that much. I mean, I know they're proud of me because, if I do a Radio 4 interview or I'm on TV, I'll always get a lovely text from my dad saying, oh, that was really good, which is lovely. I mean, and honestly, that's the one you look out for. It is the one you look out for, which is just, oh, you were really, I thought you spoke really well there. But we try to, it's more centered than that. I mean, my sister's really successful. She's a head teacher in Leicester in an inner city school. She, and I think they've just done a brilliant job of bringing us up without any of the nonsense, really. We just know what's right and what's wrong.
Brilliant.
Love that. And when you are as successful as you have been, and you've achieved the things that you have, I think sometimes people think that all of the thrill comes from business. But actually, maybe seeing your children grow up, holding your daughter's hand when they're young, or spending time with your family, I think it's important to remind people that that's the true joy, I think, in life, isn't it?
Well, that's what you do it for. I mean, just remember that, you do it for, you don't, it says, do you live to work or work to live? So I love being with my family. I also love my Peloton bike. The deepest joy for me, honestly, is that at 5 o'clock this morning, I was on that bike doing 45 minutes of that, which I just love so much. And it just gives me that energy, which is outside of work. I can't think about anything else when I'm on there. It's like, you've just got to beat your what you did in your last ride, and that's what that's about, and it's not about Aviva. So yes, I think I love that. I love spending time with my family. I went to see dear Evan Hansen in London last night. It felt like skiving off on a school night. It was something that had been sort of hangover from COVID, which my husband and I went. But these are things that I just love doing, and you've got to enjoy your life, because as my old boss once said to me, nobody, when they're lying in their coffin, says I should have worked harder.
Yeah. Can I just pick up on the point you made about being on a bike at 5 a.m? Are you a member of the 5 a.m. club?
No, I don't even know what that is. What is that?
So that's basically people that have learned that there's a great power in being out of bed before everybody else, that quiet hour before the rest of the world wakes up.
Okay. I honestly, I do feel like that. You know, my alarm will go off and I get up, and I've usually stacked my classes that I'm going to do, you know, the night before. So I go on and I do that, and I just feel I'm lucky enough to have an apartment in London, and my bike looks out onto the city. And as you say, everything is waking up, and it's really interesting. You see the first Deliveroo driver deliver to the bank across the road, you know, for those analysts that are in early doing their results. And you see, you know, people going to work, and it's just it just gives me a lot of energy.
So are you out of bed at 5 every day?
Yeah, most days, not the weekend.
So when did you decide to adopt the early starts? Has that been a lifelong thing?
Oh, always. Yeah. I mean, my mum gets up like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Really?
She literally, she cleans the house before everybody else is up. I mean, she's just unbelievable. And even today, at sort of nearly 80 years of age, that's what she does.
Brilliant. Wonderful. So interesting. We've reached the point, Amanda, where we run through some quick fire questions.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So you may well be primed for these. The first one is, what are the 3 non-negotiable behaviors that you and the people around you must buy into?
So first of all, about behavior, and, you know, I will not tolerate bullying or bad behavior. The second is bad news needs to be delivered early. Do not like surprises on bad news. And the third is operating in a silo. I really will not tolerate the team operating in a silo. Those are my sort of non-negotiables.
Just pick up on a couple of those. How do you stop teams working in a silo?
Well, I mean, I think you just have to, it's about the group scorecard. It's about objectives. So having group objectives and calling out if you can see that one team is doing something which is clearly to the detriment of another team, or not for the greater good of the group. And, you know, I've always been very focused on that.
And delivering bad news early, why does that matter?
Oh my gosh, because then you've got more brains that can help to fix the problem. You know, I mean, you do not want to have a late, I mean, let me tell you, in financial services, you definitely do not want late bad news. You want to know if there's a start of a problem, because often there's lots of things you can do to fix it. And I always think that, you know, 2 brains are better than 1. And if the more brains that are working on something, there's a chance to actually get a better outcome.
What's been the biggest sacrifice you've made for high performance, and would you make it again?
I think there's constant sacrifices, but, you know, that you have to make the sacrifice around family and home to some extent, in that, you know, my husband gave up his job. I would say he's actually made the biggest sacrifice, not me, because he gave up his job when my second daughter was born to look after the family, because we recognized that we couldn't both do it. We didn't want to both do it, and it was important that, you know, that somebody was there for the girls. And so I think that you then have to accept the sacrifices, that you're not going to be home for every play, you're not going to be there for every parents' evening. You're there for the important ones, and you sort of have to compromise a bit on that. But that's definitely a sacrifice. You know, you don't see everything that, if you're a control freak like me, that you want to.
And would you do it again?
Yes.
What is your biggest strength and what is your greatest weakness?
I think my biggest strength is basically just being able to push through things, and relentlessness, you know, keeping going, and making sure that I'm sort of, you know, driving the best out of people and out of the organization. Oh, you'd have to ask other people about my biggest weakness. I mean, I think sometimes, you know, I know taking feedback's quite hard. Taking feedback is hard, even though you like to listen. With taking personal feedback can be difficult.
Where were you? Where are you? And where are you going?
Where was I? Ooh, that's a very philosophical question, isn't it?
Yep.
So where I am is I'm in my office in London. So no, where I was, I think, was I was sort of very happy with what I'd accomplished until I came here, and now I absolutely want more. I want more. I want Aviva to be more successful than it is today. So where I am today is we've reached the end of phase 1. I feel on my particular journey here that I've reached the end of phase 1. In terms of where I'm going, it is making sure that we are absolutely at our absolute best. And I don't think much further beyond than that. Because I think if you can, you know, people that say they have 15-year career plans and all that, nah, I don't believe that. I really don't. I think you've got to see what the opportunities are and sort of roll with them.
So how far ahead do you plan in your career?
Oh, not really at all, honestly. I mean, I think you have to be good at what you do. I think too often, when you speak to really ambitious people, they're more concerned about what they're going to do next and doing a good job of what they're doing now. Yep. My fundamental belief is if you do a good job of what you're doing now, the next thing will come. It will come. And it may come from lots of, strange places, but it will definitely come.
And the final question, what's your one golden rule for living a high performance life? I suppose in many ways, your one final message you'd like to leave our listeners with.
Always do what you say you're going to do. So many times people just, they say you're going to do something and then you can see them even before they've left your office, they're going to do something different. They're not going to, but I think if you do what you say you're going to do for your customers, for your people, for your family, for yourself, you can't go far wrong.
Fantastic. I've really enjoyed that. There's such a clarity to the way that you talk and the way that you think. And maybe I'm wrong, but I get the impression that you've got more energy and more drive and more desire than ever. It feels
absolutely.
Does it feel
absolutely.
like you're right at the start of the journey, doesn't it still?
It does. No, it really does. I mean, because I think you look at the journey in phases, right? It's like we have an electric car and, basically you get to one charging point and then you start again, don't you? It's like you've filled up and you're raring to go. And I think it's a bit like that.
Fantastic. Can I just pick up with one very quick question? I want to just roll back to when we were talking about your upbringing. I'm interested, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, and we'll slip the answer further up the conversation. Where did the belief come from? So you're living in Wales. You end up at university. You go from university to taking jobs, and was there a moment where you thought, I could really make something out of my life? I don't need to just follow the path that maybe other people feel is laid out in front of them when they come from where I come from. Was there a period, a moment where you thought life can be incredible if I really want it to be?
There was no one moment. I think the belief came from my parents, which was always, about pushing you out there and making sure that you got the most out of everything that you did. So they were not ambitious for me, but they were never going to let anything sort of hold you back. So I think that was sort of, you were born with that. I think the moment where I sort of knew that it could, from a career perspective, that it could be, better was when I got that. I was sort of double promoted at the age of 28. And it was that job I talked about in Commercial Union in Leicester, where I was the branch manager and I was 29. I was basically the youngest and first female person to do that job. And you walk into this office with 300 people and, it was so daunting. But it was at that point you thought, actually, I could really make something out of this. I'm really good at this leadership thing.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's been really lovely to talk with you both. I really appreciate it.